The Arctic is not a barren, frozen wasteland. In fact, it's seen as quite valuable. The Trump administration is now selling leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas companies. That means these companies can stake a claim for exploration and maybe drilling in some of the 19 million acres of basically untouched wilderness. The Arctic is home to some of the most unique ecosystems in the world: tundra, boreal forests, and sea ice. It's home to polar bears, porcupine, caribou, but more than this, it's home to people that depend on the land and waters.
We are a traditional Inupiat community depending upon feeding our families from our lands and waters. As our elders have done, it's our small village of 500 people going up against the state of Alaska and the industry of oil and gas development.
And the Arctic economy is formed in part by tourism, fishing, mineral extraction.
From throughout the world,
Remember the gold rush?
To strike it rich.
And then, of course, the oil and gas industry, which has been a cornerstone of not only Alaska's economy, but of the United States strategy to energy independence.
Untapped oil reserves and a score of other minerals vital to modern industry.
But the idea of exploring for oil reserves and developing more Alaskan territory for drilling, especially offshore, strikes at the heart of the controversy. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet.
What do we want? Climate justice! Why do we want it? Now!
This region essentially provides for everyone in the whole world an estimated $281 billion per year in food, minerals, oil, tourism, hunting, and that estimate even includes the value of the Arctic's unique ecosystems just for merely existing.
Everyone is impacted by what happens in the Arctic. Environmental change, sea level rise from the diminishment of the Greenland ice sheet, that affects all economies, all countries. Weather patterns are changing, increasing in storm severity and droughts. Everybody.
So in an effort to stave off climate change to preserve those Arctic ecosystems, there's a push for energy solutions. Even the big banks are refusing to fund new oil drilling operations in the Arctic, like Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and Citi. While there's potentially billions of dollars in untapped oil and gas reserves in the Arctic, it can be said there's value in keeping the Arctic untouched too.
World's ecosystems were giving us more value than the gross national product than all our economic activity put together.
Here's how we attach value, monetary and otherwise, to something as big and alive as the Arctic. Putting a monetary value on an entire region is met with controversy because, of course, how can we put a price on land for its potential resources when people live there?
So you can't put a monetary value on nature. That's commoditizing nature, or that can't be done. These are intrinsic values and so on.
O'Garra points to a controversial paper from 1994 that valued the world's ecosystem at $33 trillion a year. And that valuation didn't include the Arctic.
I'm an environmental economist, and a lot of my work involves trying to make visible those ecosystem goods and services that are otherwise unaccounted for by policymakers. They're provided to us for free by nature, and yet because they're not traded in the market, they often get ignored.
So O'Garra set out to approximate the economic value of the Arctic's ecosystem services. She says there's a lack of data on the Arctic, so her paper in 2016 is a preliminary assessment. But she ultimately came to this number, $281 billion per year. That's slightly more than the market cap of both Exxon and Chevron combined. It includes items like food, mineral extraction, oil production, tourism, hunting. But in addition to those industries we can see and therefore more easily quantify, most of that $281 billion valuation is provided by what O'Garra calls climate stabilization.
The Arctic provides the entire world with climate stabilization. And in the absence of that, we may well see changing growing seasons, more hurricanes, more droughts, and more unstable climate with everything that comes with it, and probably the decimation of many species.
Climate stabilization provided by the Arctic came out to be worth more than $216 billion. It includes the Arctic storage of methane and frost. Methane is a huge contributor to global warming. If the methane is trapped in the Arctic's ice, the gas is kept from impacting the ozone layer. And then there's the ice albedo effect. This is when the ice and snow reflect the sun's radiation, and that helps keep the Earth cool. The fight over the Arctic is a lot more nuanced than just assigning a number to whatever the region may or may not supply. There's a lot we don't know about the Arctic. There are oil reserves that may exist, and they could be offshore, so like out in the freezing Arctic waters. That makes it expensive to drill down and explore for those resources, not to mention dangerous. When it comes to the U.S. economic development in the Arctic, it is concentrated on the North Slope of Alaska. That's the most northern part of the state. It has nearly 89,000 square miles of land, and it's part of the Arctic Circle. Its population is made up of 80% indigenous people.
White men are coming to the Arctic now in ever-increasing numbers.
Rosemary Atomarok lives in Nuiqsut, Alaska, which is right in the middle of a ton of oil and natural gas development.
I would see the natural gas flares while they were 60 miles away. You can see the reflection off the snow and into the sky above the clouds, surrounding our community, surrounding us with lights and activity. Activities around us are changing our lands and waters.
Nuiqsut is home to fewer than 500 people. It can be accessed only by air travel. There's one school.
Hunters riding snowmobiles with rifles slung over their shoulders rely on the migratory.
And snowmobiles, which are called snow machines in Alaska, are used to get around the village.
Whaling is linked to the immediate needs of small communities.
Whaling, hunting, and fishing are still a big part of the cultural identity and the local economy.
April is called the moon for the beginning of whaling.
Migratory routes of caribou have shifted. People have to travel farther to harvest.
We'd have to go out more, come home with empty catches more often because the changes are not conducive to why our animals come into our lands and waters.
And community members are increasingly suffering from respiratory diseases, and not from COVID-19.
Started seeing changes in our health. We had people who were having respiratory troubles and illnesses that were developing.
She's been fighting against industry development in her community for years, and she says these companies don't offer many lucrative job opportunities for her community.
Even if we do take some of those jobs, the jobs we get offered from industry are the stick pickers, picking up the trash at the development site, working in the camps to clean up the camps, or ice road, truck driving, in which we're building a temporary ice road.
Oil development is a huge part of the North Slope's operating revenue. In 2006, more than 74% of its income came from property taxes. Whose property? Mostly the oil and gas industry.
We had to allow oil and gas development to happen to have a seat at the table. And yet I have worked on this process for almost 40 years. So people who really work at protecting our communities often have barriers put in place to prevent them from even entering the door.
The North Slope currently holds approximately 6.1 billion barrels of oil that can be extracted. That could be worth an estimated $561 billion. But that value depends on wherever oil prices go. And right now, that's certainly not up.
I worry about these processes because when my voice is not in these tables, who's looking out for human health and the importance of tradition and culture? Because it's not something my community will leave behind.
The American Arctic is pretty politically polarized.
This administration is going to open up to drilling and allow it to be destroyed for an indeterminate amount of oil.
And the controversy over drilling
Why?
is loud.
As tax reform has been long awaited, so has opening the 1002 area to limited exploration and production.
The effort to open the Arctic Refuge has nothing to do with national security, has nothing to do with gas prices, or has nothing to do with energy independence. It has to do with greed, plain and simple.
the Trump administration opened up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for drilling in August 2020.
Well, they can open it up, but if nobody wants to drill there, then it becomes a moot point. It's a symbolic act.
The refuge is a 19 million acre protected wilderness area.
They basically reopened it. And so this is what I call the pendulum swing policy. Closed under the previous administration, reopened, and then it just keeps going.
The 1998 U.S. Geological Survey estimated that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge could hold 10.4 billion barrels of undiscovered, recoverable oil.
Industry will decide what it wants to do. And drilling activity in the United States is close to a 100-year low.
Long story short, besides the actual drilling, just exploring for possible oil reserves is costly, time-consuming, and even dangerous. Not to mention destructive to the environment. Exploring for oil can take years, and companies need infrastructure. Add Arctic weather into the equation, that drives up costs and risks. So basically,
the math does not work.
And it could be a PR nightmare.
Oil companies do not care about the politics, but they care about PR. And even if, hypothetically, the economics in the Arctic were attractive, which they are not, that PR reputational risk of going into a place that will provoke lots of protests.
All these people peacefully out here trying to keep Shell from drilling in the Arctic.
Lots of environmental advocacy. That alone would turn, some companies off.
First of all, there are only so many countries that actually have a say as to what goes on in the Arctic. There are the players that actually have territory at stake, and that's the United States, Russia, Canada, Norway, and the Kingdom of Denmark, which is just Greenland. Then there are the neighbors, Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. All 8 of these countries make up the Arctic Council, and alongside the council are the permanent participants, which are the indigenous communities that live there.
The Arctic has always been important. We just forgot about its importance in some ways, particularly at the end of the Cold War.
Submarines constantly on guard.
The Arctic, very basically, has always been essential for U.S. national security.
Or the Nautilus, en route to the Arctic.
And Alaska was always essential for America's energy independence.
Since the U.S. purchased Alaska in 1867, it's been seen as a critical piece of the U.S. national security strategy.
Military strategists know that the United States is vulnerable to attack, that an enemy from across the Pacific could base on Alaska.
There's billions of dollars in the energy sector. For example, Russia has spent a lot of time and money trying to find oil up there.
Russia has a lot of say and a lot of power. The Arctic for them is about national survival from a security standpoint as well as an economic standpoint.
The Arctic is a big part of Russia's energy industry. As for the U.S.,
that I see that the power in the Arctic that the United States needs to focus on is Russia. They have legitimate issues and their presence is growing.
It's still unclear whether exploration for oil reserves in the Arctic will continue, and whether drilling will happen at all. And the evolving digital landscape might just be perfect for the Arctic environment.
What I call the digital Arctic. And this is increasingly, we're seeing some of the major technology companies build very large data storage facilities in the north because it's cool. You can save energy. You don't have to have those big coolants. The Arctic isn't just shorten shipping distance, it shortens information distances. So if you can shorten the distance, you'll get that financial information 1 centilla faster than anybody else. That's huge. So you see the Chinese very interested in building undersea cables from Finland to China. We're looking at space-based assets that, again, we have competing GPS systems and the Russian system and Chinese system.
As for what happens next, only time will tell.
In terms of what will happen, I really don't know. It depends on public attitudes. It depends on the outcome of the election.
We need the voices throughout our nation to rise and protect the public lands that are important, because we share migrations of birds and animals that come to the Arctic that travel to all 7 continents. When they come to us, they come for renewal. They return to you to grow and then come back in the new season. We want to continue to protect our lands and waters, for we are in this together. Protecting our lands and waters throughout our nation is important for the health of all of our people.